Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for exploring the security grant funding landscape for rural and tribal communities. I'm Michael Paddock, CEO of Grants Office, and came from a rural community. Happy you joined us today. Before we get started, I want to very much thank Genetech for sponsoring today's session and making it possible for us to bring you this information. Thanks, Genetech. Got a couple of housekeeping items for you as well. As many of you know, you can listen hands-free over your computer speakers or headphones. You don't need to dial in, but if you do become disconnected for some reason, you can go to the audio and video menu at the top of your screen. If you don't see the audio and video menu, there's a little show menu bar menu at the top that you can use to find the audio and video menu there. Also, you can ask questions at any time using the question and answer interface at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Again, if you don't see it, look for the three dots at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to find the Q&A interface there. So the session is being recorded, and the replay, along with a whole slew of additional resources, including our white paper, Grant Funding for Rural, Small, and Tribal Safety and Security Initiatives, will all be available on the resources page. Kate has added that to the chat, so you should see it there as well. So a lot of great resources will be available to you, including the replay of today's session after the end of the session. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few different things and try to take a sort of step back and a more holistic perspective on rural and tribal funding, including taking into account some of the changes that we're seeing as well, and kind of how to navigate that landscape. We had a conversational session yesterday to talk about that topic specifically. And if you missed that, you can also find that on our website. So we're going to start with an overview of grant funding, and then how to tell if a grant is technology friendly. Then we'll get into some key components of federal grants, and then a little bit more tactical grant readiness tips and tricks. And then we'll talk about the Genetech grant support team and the services that they offer at no cost or obligation, I should mention. And then how to engage with the Genetech Grant Support Program. Grants Office is very pleased and proud to be working with Genetech to support the Genetech Grant Support Program. And we think you'll really appreciate the resources and tools that it offers. And then with the time remaining, we'll get into any questions that have come in. So I'm joined by a great group of panelists today. We've got Jeannie Smith, Program Manager for Grants and Contracts at Genetech. Also Shannon Day, Senior Grants Development Consultant here at Grants Office. And Meghan Jacobsen, Grants Development Associate here at Grants Office as well. A knowledgeable group, an experienced group who have a lot of great things to tell us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon Day to get us started with an overview of grant funding. Shannon?
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us today. First, I would like to give an overview of the sources of grant funding for public safety agencies. But before we do that, as Michael mentioned, I want to briefly address the current situation regarding federal grant funding. As Michael mentioned, he and Chris are doing a series of webinars, which are extremely helpful. So that little QR code you see up in the corner will take you to that page directly. I highly recommend, if you haven't watched these, watch them. They're incredibly helpful. But I do want to ensure everyone that we are keeping an eye on things. So at this time, most federal grants are on pause while department heads and funding offices review the NOFOs, or that means Notice of Funding Opportunity. We use a lot of acronyms, so I try to remember not to use too many acronyms for folks. So this is also often referred to as application guidance. It goes by a number of names, but in a nutshell, agencies and departments are reviewing those NOFOs to ensure that the program priorities align with the current administration's priorities. And this is nothing new. It happens just about every new administration in some fashion. So, as I mentioned, we at Grants Office continue to monitor the status of federal grants very closely And again, if you scan that QR code, it will take you to our resources page. And again, we're keeping tabs on grants. Specifically, the importance of federal grants is that it is the largest source of grant funding for law enforcement and public safety agencies. So when we talk about grants and grant funding, we're really talking about monies offered to eligible recipients in exchange for carrying out a project that is of interest to the funder. That's kind of legalese. So there are three main categories of grant funding. There are federal funders, state funders, and foundation funders. As you can see, the largest by far in terms of overall funding comes from the federal government. Over $700 billion a year is available from 26 federal grant making agencies through a variety of competitive, pass-through, entitlement, or cooperative agreement opportunities. Federal grants tend to be much more competitive because they draw from a nationwide pool of applicants, but in exchange for that, the award sizes are generally larger. They also have a more complex application and administration process, so there are trade-offs. Next level is state agencies. So in contrast to federal government funding, state funding tends to be a little less competitive, again, because it's a state pool of applicants rather than a federal pool. But the funds tend to be a little smaller because it's either coming from the state budget or it's coming through pass-through funding, which I'll mention in a minute. So it really varies by state how plentiful those state-funded grants are. So some states may invest heavily in public safety initiatives, while other states may not. So together, federal and state agencies make up what we call public grant funding, as the monies are funded through our tax dollars. And again, these grants, because they're funded through taxes, they are subject to a lot of regulations. And finally, rounding out the available grant funding landscape are private grant funders, which we also refer to as foundations. These can be corporations, families, individuals, community foundations. These grants really run the gamut from small to large in award size, in competitiveness. They're primarily for nonprofits and 501c3s, but we do see some funding out there for municipal and public agencies. So while it's not common, you'll definitely want to keep your ear to the ground, keep your eye open for any local foundations whose priorities may align with what your agency is trying to accomplish. So at the federal level, the primary sources for funding public safety initiatives are those federal and state grants, as I mentioned. And again, I do want to briefly address, because you are probably seeing it in the news, that the Department of Justice is threatening to withhold funding from so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. There really is no legal definition of what constitutes a sanctuary jurisdiction, but unofficially, it's a state, county, city, or town that has policies to protect undocumented immigrants. We saw this happen during the first Trump administration back in 2016. Federal funds were tied up in courts, but those funds were eventually released. So we're, again, keeping an eye on the situation at this time. So when we talk about state grant funding, and when I mention state agencies, we're not only talking about grants funded through the state budget, but we also kind of lump in federal pass-through funding, which means those are federally funded programs, but they are passed through state agencies. And those are the funds that will likely be most affected by this potential funding freeze. Think of things like the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grants, or JAG, which I'll talk about a little later. these Stop Violence Against Women Act grants. There are a lot of them. So those may be affected, but again, we are keeping an eye on things. Things are quickly evolving. Anyway, that said, today we're going to focus primarily on federal funding because state funding is so varied. The top funding agencies for public safety initiatives are the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice. Some of the funding officers within these agencies include the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Office on Violence Against Women, the COPS Office or Community Oriented Policing, FEMA, and others. We don't have time for me to name them all, but know that when you hear these funding office names, they're Department of Justice offices. So it all falls under the umbrella of either Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security. And the DOJ focuses funding for criminal justice initiatives primarily, while DHS provides fundings for other first responder agencies like fire and EMS, in addition to law enforcement agencies. So let's talk about what constitutes small, rural, and tribal, because there really isn't one definition for these. We'll start with tribal agencies because that's a little easier to define. So to be eligible to apply to receive grant funding, a tribe must be federally recognized by the Secretary of the Interior. One very recent example of this process literally happening as we speak, back in January, shortly after taking office, Trump signed a memorandum asking the Department of the Interior to move towards fully recognizing the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina as Native American, as federally recognized. This recognition, if passed, will allow that tribe to receive federal funding. So, of the 258 tribal police departments in the United States, all of them, every single one, has fewer than 250 sworn officers. The largest native tribal law enforcement agency is the Navajo Nation, with 210 sworn officers. I also want to note that when it comes to grant funding, federally recognized Indian tribes are statutorily, that's a hard word, identified as rural, regardless of their location. So when considering federal grants for tribal agencies, they are eligible to apply to most Department of Justice grant funding opportunities. Next, small and rural. Those are a little more difficult to nail down because those definitions fluctuate over time, they vary by department, and sometimes even individual grant programs will vary their definitions of small or rural. Based on the 2020 census data, 20% of the population, or 66.3 million people, and 97% of the land area of our country is classified as rural. And while I would love to give you a simple definition of rural, or tell you X number of population is rural, it's not that easy and it's not that simple. So consider I live in a small town with only a few thousand people. Looking at the population alone, I live in a rural community. But my town is also only a few miles outside a mid-sized urban area. So geographically, I'm not rural. So there are a lot of factors we need to consider when looking to see if an organization or an agency is located in a rural community. And then finally, there is small. As with rural, small varies by grant program. For example, the Small Rural and Tribal Body-Worn Camera Program defines small as 50 or fewer full-time sworn personnel. And the Rural and Small Department Violent Crime Reduction Program defines small as 250 or fewer full-time sworn officers. That's a pretty big gap. And as you can see on this lovely pie chart, by that definition, 98.3% of law enforcement agencies in the country are considered small. So that's a lot of small departments. I don't consider 250 small. but that particular grant does. So as I continue to talk, you're going to notice a theme, and Megan probably talks about it too. Read the guidance for the grant program you're interested in. Because you don't want to do all the work in preparing to and applying for a grant only to discover that your agency doesn't serve a rural community or your agency isn't small based on that particular program's definition of rural or small. So, when I'm researching grants for Genetech customers, I'm looking for two key pieces of information: eligibility, which we just talked about, and technology friendliness is what we call it, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before that, I want to give you some examples of some grant programs that hit that sweet spot of being eligible for small, rural, or tribal agencies and may be used for the technology or equipment departments need to do their jobs. Please know that there are numerous grant programs out there for your agency. And as I mentioned earlier, small, rural, and tribal agencies aren't restricted to grants that mention them in the title. So again, reading the eligibility section of most public safety grants, you'll see that your small agency can apply. I just want to give you an idea of the types of grants that are out there. So the first grant here, many of you may have heard of. It's the Edward Burr Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, or JAG. JAG is the primary provider of federal criminal justice funding for states and local jurisdictions, providing the critical funding necessary to support a range of program areas, which include law enforcement, prosecution and court programs, prevention and education programs, corrections, drug treatment and enforcement, crime victim and witness initiatives, planning, evaluation, and technology improvement programs. So JAG funding is available across two funding areas. There is JAG Local and JAG State. Both programs are funded through a formula. States and localities receive funds based on their resident population and on violent crime statistics. And based on this information, local governments receive formula funding anywhere from $10,001 on up. And if a local government is on that local list, they apply directly to the Bureau of Justice Assistance to get their annual allocation. And if your jurisdiction doesn't receive a direct JAG allocation, you may still be eligible to receive JAG funding through your state. So each state, again, gets an annual allocation. They designate a single state administering agency, or SAA, to administer JAG funding. States are required to pass through a certain percentage of their annual JAG allocation to local jurisdictions. This percentage really varies by state. There's a list somewhere out there. But otherwise, states have a lot of flexibility with how JAG funds are used, which also means there could be a lot of variation from state to state and even from year to year. So, for example, a state may opt to distribute funds to multi-jurisdictional task forces annually. New Hampshire does this, for example. Or a state may opt to host a competitive JAG program for law enforcement equipment one year, and then the following year distribute formula funds for a community outreach initiative. So you really want to keep an eye on what your state is doing. States are also required to open their JAG plans for public review and comment. So you want to make sure you're advocating for your department and for your community's needs, because that's how SAAs discover what their priorities are in their state, by getting feedback from you. Next, like JAG for municipal agencies, the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, or CTAS, is the grant for tribal criminal justice initiatives. A few years ago, the DOJ combined disparate programs through its various funding offices into one program, to kind of help simplify the process. Applicants then select which program area or areas they will be applying under. This year, the total funding of $105 million is distributed across 8 purpose areas related to public safety, criminal and juvenile justice, substance use related crime, and access to treatment and recovery support. This includes tribal healing to wellness courts and the needs of victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. So while they're all under the DOJ umbrella, each program is administered through various DOJ funding offices like the Office of Community-Oriented Policing, the Office on Violence Against Women, Bureau of Justice Assistance, etc. This program is literally open as we speak. It is one of the few DOJ programs that has not been clawed back. So it is still open, accepting applications with a grants.gov deadline of March 18th and a Just Grants deadline of March 25th. And any of you who have applied to federal funding through DOJ over the past few years are familiar with Just Grants. And finally, we have the Rural and Small Department Violent Crime Reduction Program. This is the program that defines small as 250 or fewer full-time sworn personnel. So again, many years ago at this point, the DOJ received a lot of feedback from smaller agencies who didn't have the luxury of having a grant staff or even a single employee dedicated to grants. So DOJ started creating programs to make federal funding a little more accessible for those smaller agencies, and this is one of them. Bureau of Justice Assistance has taken feedback and best practices from chiefs of larger metropolitan agencies when it comes to preventing and addressing violent crime, and they use those practices to help smaller agencies, because while each jurisdiction has its own unique challenges, violent crime is violent crime, and reducing violent crime in any jurisdiction requires some of the same things like collaboration, evidence-informed, and innovative strategies. There are a wide variety of tools and subject matter experts available to help law enforcement and key stakeholders in smaller communities perform this important work, not even related to grants. But all jurisdictions have all their own challenges, various stakeholders, different resources. So there really is no singular or static solution to reducing violent crime that can be applied to every single agency. So rather broader institutional and systemic strategies are needed to address the underlying causes of violence. That's where this program can become quite flexible and basically tailorable to your agency's needs. In 2024, the program provided funding to small and or rural and or tribal agencies and or prosecutors' offices interested in implementing or improving the capacity of their organization around one or more critical elements to include community engagement, partnerships, technology, analytics and intelligence, training, tactics, resources and sustainability, and accountability. And in 2024, there was $6 million available. The year before that, it was around 11 million. So we're waiting to see when the program's open, what type of funding will be available this year. And again, in 2024, the deadline was in May. We are hoping the deadline will be around the same time this year, but again, we're in a holding pattern, a wait and see until we see what happens at the federal level. So I did tell you that I would talk about that second most important component to researching grants when I'm researching for Genetech Solutions. And that is if the grant is what we consider technology friendly or technology neutral. So understand that grants broadly divide into 2 categories. Those specifically for technology, as you'll see on the left, and those for everything else. It's important to understand that grants explicitly funding technology are rare. They're scarce. A customer seeking funding for Genetec's automated license plate readers, for example, for a drug enforcement project, let's say, you would struggle to find grants solely for ALPRs if you set out Googling it. This is because grant funders primarily focus on the desired social impact or the outcome, rather than the specific technological means to achieve that outcome. So far more common are technology friendly / neutral grants, where grant funders prioritize projects with a holistic approach, such as reducing opioid trafficking by engaging the community, conducting outreach, and utilizing ALPRs to track offenders. Notice the technology is not forward in that statement, rather than solely funding the technology. And while there are occasionally grants out there that are created to fund the specific technology solutions, like body-worn camera grants, they will devote the majority of awarded funds to that specific technology. It is not often that we see these types of grants pop up. When we do, we get excited, but they're rare. So by overlooking these other grants that don't explicitly mention technology or equipment, but will fund it within a comprehensive project, you may be leaving funding on the table. And we're aiming to prevent this by revealing that wider range of tech funding possibilities. So we encourage you to think creatively about how your needed Genetec solution may be part of a wider project. How can the solution fit in as just another tool in your toolbox to do the work you do, along with things like professional development, training, staffing, supplies, contractual services, whatever you need to make a successful project. And this strategic approach will significantly expand your grant opportunities and increase your chances of securing funding. Understanding how certain types of grants support specific technology solutions, how do we determine if a grant is technology friendly? When looking at potential grants that can fund technology, one of the most important steps we can take is to check the grant's guidance. I told you I would say it a lot. This usually comes in the form of a request for proposal, or RFP, or RFA, or NOFO. Again, they're all application guidance released by the funder. It's vital that we review this document for information such as deadlines, funding information, application instructions, budget information, eligibility, etc. However, if we really want to know if the grant is tech friendly, we usually check the allowable or unallowable expenses / costs for the grant. Funders will be specific about what can or cannot be purchased in the RFP under this section. Grants that list specific allowable technologies to be purchased or even installed can be considered tech friendly. There are also grants that will not be explicit, but they'll essentially say, we'll fund the things you need to do to be successful. So really reading between the lines. We also want to read between the lines when it comes to priorities of the program. So if we have a specific project in mind that can utilize technology, it's imperative that we make sure our project's goals and mission are fully aligned with the program's objectives and their goals and priorities. Critically and objectively assess whether your technology directly addresses the program's intended outcomes. And we can also get a better sense of if a grant is truly tech friendly by looking at what sort of projects the program has funded in previous grant cycles. These past funded projects can usually be seen on the funder's website, though sometimes they don't publish this information. It really is dependent on the grant or the funder itself. So we'll want to look at if the grant program has leveraged tech solutions in the past to fulfill its mission through these past projects. And if past project information isn't readily available, it's always possible to reach out to the funder directly for any previous project information through a Freedom of Information Act or a FOIA request. So let's consider some of these specific Genetech solutions. Police officers worldwide are burdened with expanding responsibilities. Forward-thinking technology can provide a platform that facilitates communication and collaboration to improve public safety. The Genetech Justice and Public Safety portfolio helps public safety agencies manage their physical security and digital evidence in a single platform. So optimize the way you gather and share evidence with Genetech Clearance, a digital evidence management system. You can quickly request, share, manage, and reference crucial evidence to aid your investigations, handle cases and files from a single application, grant instant access to evidence at the click of a button, and ensure information is only shared with authorized stakeholders inside or outside your organization. Genetech CityGraph is a real-time situational awareness support system that unifies data streams and operations across city departments. CityGraph disseminates timely information and provides greater situational awareness to law enforcement agencies. Genetech AutoView, an ALPR system, can identify, track, and monitor vehicles of interest to your law enforcement agency by tagging suspicious behavior, so you can optimize your crime response and improve overall investigation time. The AutoView automatic license plate recognition system captures and cross-references license plate reads and matches alongside video footage of incidents, contextual images, and GPS information. Genetech Security Center is a comprehensive public safety platform that allows for the full unification of video surveillance, access control, ALPRs, intercom management, intrusion panel integration, mobile cameras, cloud storage, and more. With a platform that unifies your data, you can manage security policies, run investigations, and pay attention to what matters most. Currently, law enforcement agencies worldwide use Security Center platform to monitor public spaces and to manage security and operations for internal systems, including interview rooms and holding cells. And finally, Omnicast provides seamless control of all video operations and rapid response to emerging situations with a single modular platform. Reacting to emergencies is one part of the solution. Omnicast allows you to connect video and other data to be proactive in your operations. You can unify video with other core security systems such as access control, ALPR, intrusion monitoring, and communications. In the realm of grant applications, even those predisposed towards technology, there are crucial considerations to bear in mind throughout the process. Perhaps the most paramount factor to prioritize is the establishment of a compelling project need. Simply lacking funds or technology isn't sufficient. So when considering your needs statement, it's imperative to demonstrate that your organization's needs align with the grant's priorities. This may necessitate a shift in perspective. How will the implementation of technology directly address this need? Instead of a weak statement like our staff desired more cameras, a more impactful justification might be phrased as with the objective of enhancing overall visibility, expediting response times from local law enforcement, and solidifying the safety of our community members. We're requesting funding to procure additional or upgraded surveillance cameras, alongside corresponding upgrades to the video management system at X location. So this meticulously crafted needs statement really lays the groundwork for subsequently explaining why the requested technology is a vital component within the budget justification section of the application. Ultimately, the key lies in demonstrating how your technology directly supports grant-funded activities and serves as a critical tool in reaching the project's overall objectives. Finally, the inclusion of vendors, such as your Genetech representatives, alongside your IT staff, facility managers, is vital to ensure a successful outcome. One valuable tip is to collect and retain quotes from Genetech and any other vendors you're working with, because you will need these when you're developing your budget, and those folks will help you because they speak tech language better than most of us. While each grant has unique components, most grants have a few things in common. And I'm going to talk about general application components for DOJ grants. And again, these are common to a lot of grant proposals. So the first step for applying for any federal or pass-through grant is verifying that your organization's SAM number, or System for Award Management, also known as a Unique Entity Identifier, or UEI, is current and up to date. This seemingly minor detail is crucial because an outdated or non-existent SAM number can cause a delay of several weeks while in the process of obtaining or updating yours. Furthermore, if applying to state pass-through funding, you'll also want to confirm with your state's designated agency whether registration for any specific state portals is required. These portals usually serve as the platform for submitting your application package at the state level. And the applications themselves are usually comprised of three essential components. The abstract. The abstract summarizes your proposed project. It includes the purpose, primary activities, expected outcomes, service area, etc. These are usually in short paragraph form without bullets or tables. They're usually written in the third person. And because abstracts for funded projects may be made publicly available, they should exclude personally identifiable information. I want to read you an example of an abstract from an awarded proposal. It's a couple of paragraphs long, so bear with me. But I think it's important for you to hear the whole abstract, so you can hear what types of projects are funded. So, the town of X, a small rural community grappling with gun violence, is seeking to decrease gun violence, deter violent crime, and create a safer environment for residents through the implementation of threat detection technology. The community is experiencing an above average rate of violent crimes, largely concentrated in specific neighborhoods. These incidences have been attributed to insufficient policing support, slow response times, and a lack of resources. The X Police Department, a small agency with a strong commitment to community engagement, is striving to address this issue by deploying state-of-the-art technology to aid in the real-time detection and response to violent crimes. The project proposes the installation of threat detection sensors in high-crime sectors to provide accurate real-time data of violent incidents. The project design is centered around the communication of equipment installations and crime data to the public, expansion of coverage area with threat detection technology, and real-time tracking of gunshots and violent crime using these sensors. These measures will enhance the department's ability to respond quickly and accurately to violent crimes, fostering a safer and more positive community environment for all. And the reason I wanted to read you that whole thing, because I want you to notice that the requested technology is one small component of the comprehensive project, and you'll notice that the outcome is the key message. Next, the proposal narrative is where you expand on each component you summarized in your abstract. Generally, for DOJ grants, they're 8 to 10 pages, but again, you want to check the guidance to ensure that you're complying with all of the requirements, font size, margin size, page numbers, etc. So generally, they're 8 to 10 pages. They will likely include a description of the issue. This is where you identify your need, your strategy for addressing that need, a description of the programs to be funded over the grant period, It will likely also include project design and implementation, which describes the applicant's process for engaging stakeholders from across the justice continuum and also within your community. You may also identify other stakeholders involved in the process, any gaps in funding that this grant will help you address. It will also include capabilities and competencies, which describes additional strategic planning or coordination efforts to, again, kind of help you plug those budget holes. It will also allow you to provide an overview of any informed programs that you've already implemented and how those programs might help your grant-funded project succeed. And the narrative will likely also include a plan for collecting data required. So again, when you're looking at application guidance, yes, you need to check to see what's required of you on the application side of things, but you'll also want to see what the funder expects of you on the administration side of things. So you don't need to provide this information for the application, but you do need to provide them with your acknowledgement that you will be able to provide this information. A lot of times it's internal data analysis, or you may partner with an external agency like a local university to analyze the data to provide the funder evidence that your project is successful. And finally, every grant requires a budget and a budget narrative. These are critical elements. Grant reviewers often read the budget narrative first because the budget is really the foundation upon which a grant proposal is built. So note that the budget narrative, sometimes called a budget justification, should include a full description of all the costs included in the budget. And this is where working with your vendors will be important. The budget also needs to include a thorough and clear description of every cost listed in the narrative section. So everything needs to line up, because otherwise they'll throw red flags on it. And you also want to justify why those costs are necessary to the completion and success of your proposed project. So now I would like to pass it over to Megan to briefly provide you with some general grant readiness tips and tricks that we find very helpful. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Shannon. So yeah, I just want to take a quick moment to talk about grant readiness. So if your agency or organization has never applied for grants in the past, the process can be very daunting. So grants do take some planning, but having a roadmap laid out is going to ultimately make the process much, much easier. So let me just move my slide. Give me one moment. All right, so let's first start with the basics. So here you're going to see a checklist of essential tasks that you're going to need to complete to get grant ready. This process ideally starts long before the opening of a grants application cycle. The more time you have, the better. The first thing you're going to want to do, and Shannon talked about this a little bit, a lot of this might be a repeat, but that's because it's worth repeating. It's very important to know, is that you want to define your why. So going into the grant seeking process, you really need to have a solid understanding of why you are seeking funding. As Shannon said, you can't simply go into the process just because you have a budget shortfall. Instead, you need to know what needs or challenges you are hoping to address through grants and how addressing those needs or challenges are going to further your agency or organization's mission. Second, forming an internal grants team is going to be so helpful to you and the entire process. Ideally, this team should consist of folks across the agency, from upper management to finance to IT, to the boots on the ground workers. This is not only going to ensure organizational buy-in, but it's also going to give you a holistic view of everything that you're going to need to implement a project. It's also going to help you break up tasks so there's not just one or two people responsible for the entire proposal and grant process. Okay, so next, creating a grant seeking document folder is going to help you in avoiding last minute scrambles to gather required documents for a proposal. So documents such as, your proof of tax status, your mission statement, financial documents are commonly requested as a piece of a proposal. And so having those in one place and accessible by people on the grants team is going to ensure a smoother kind of end game towards submitting that application. And then building a grant seeking calendar is going to give your team a visual of when certain milestones need to be met in order to stay on track. And it's also going to ensure that everybody knows everybody's role and deadline. And then finally, Shannon talked about this too. Keep in mind that a UEI number is required to apply for federal and some state grants. This is a number that can be obtained by registering with sam.gov, and just know that this process takes a few weeks. So the earlier you can get that done, the better. You don't want not having this number to tie you up and maybe even keep you from submitting this year. If your organization already has a UEI number, this is your reminder that it's something that has to be updated annually. And then even if a UEI number isn't required, you still want to check the application guidance just to see if any type of registration is required and get on that early. Okay, so you're going to find that some of the grant programs out there, and Shannon talked about this in some of the grants that she mentioned, they mentioned things like community collaboration and community outreach. So some of these grants are going to either require that you have a partnership, or they are going to you're going to be more competitive if you have a partnership, or you'll have a stronger project with a partnership. So as we stated before, we always recommend forming that internal team. And through meetings with your internal team, you're going to be able to have a better understanding of what you as an agency brings to the table, and where there may be some gaps where bringing a partner in will help you have a more holistic and just better project. So with partners, it's important to bring them in as early as you can. Engage them in discussions surrounding your project's goals and how those goals will align to their priorities as well. So include them in project planning and ensure people on both sides have a voice. You should really frame your outreach through the lens of what can we do for you, or what can we accomplish together. And this is ultimately going to foster that mutually beneficial partnership. So as these initial meetings and conversations evolve, you really want to continue cultivating the partnership, obviously through the project's implementation, but even beyond that. Not only is that going to help you have a successful project, but if it's a successful collaboration, it may open the door for more projects you can do in partnership with this other agency or organization. And then lastly, just make sure that you are formalizing the partnership through a memorandum of understanding. It's also known as an MOU. This is like a formal statement of commitment to partnership and is required as a piece of a grant proposal. So you'll want to get that early on as well. All right, so you've made it through getting grant ready. You have a solid partnership in place. I just want to wrap this up with a few tips to make your actual proposal more competitive. So first, Shannon said it, I will say it again. Just remember that grants fund projects and not products. Technology and other products requested as part of a grant should always, always, always tie back to the project. Meaning that they are needed in order to make your project a success. This is why a strong needs statement is so important. You want to start with the goal, and then you want to figure out what you need to accomplish it. Put the project first, and then follow with the product. And then third, it has been said by Shannon, I'll say it again, always read the application guidance. You want to make sure that you understand all of the requirements with a grant, not only the requirements for the proposal, but post-award requirements. First, I'll start with the proposal. I have seen it many times in the past where a grant guidance will lay out very specifically what they want a proposal to look like and in what order they want everything in. And if the grant you're interested in does that, you want to follow it to a T. It's very important. And then lastly, you just want to make sure that you understand everything that's involved with the grant, because grants aren't just free money. This is a funder that is investing in you and wants some sort of return on that investment through a successful project. So make sure that you understand those post-award elements. We just always want potential grant recipients to go in with their eyes open, know the program now, so that you're not potentially unpleasantly surprised later on. And then our fourth tip is to use SMART goals while developing your grant proposal. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, results-focused, and time-bound. Avoid being vague and instead be clear and direct about how you intend to implement the project, what the outcomes will be, and how those outcomes will be measured. And then finally, before clicking submit, make sure that you have somebody else read through it. Getting that second or even ideally third set of eyes on there may catch some pretty important errors, may catch acronyms or abbreviations that the funder might not understand, typos, just anything. Getting that outside feedback and implementing that feedback is ultimately going to give you a more successful proposal. And then with that note, I'm going to pass things over to Jeannie to talk about the Genetech Grant Support Program.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Shannon and Megan, for all that great information. As Michael said at the beginning of this presentation, my name is Jeannie Smith. I'm the program manager for the Genetech Grants Office, and I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about our grants program. The Genetech Grant Support Team is now into our third year in partnership with the Grants Office. You heard from two of my partners on this webinar today, and I'm very happy to say this partnership has helped our customers procure more than $4 million in grant awards in our first year and over $12 million in our second year, providing information about grants and customized research, identifying available grant funding. For those who needed it, we've also consulted with them on project ideas and provided grant application assistance. Whatever the level of assistance required for customers seeking to fund Genetech solutions with grants, these services are provided at no cost, paid for by Genetech. Grants are available for publicly funded agencies and nonprofit organizations across the United States. The list that you see on your screen is not exhaustive by any means. So education and law enforcement, emergency responders, fire protection, states, municipalities, healthcare, transportation. I'm sure I'm missing some. Any agency you can think of that is not for profit, there is funding out there. There's one exception, the federal government. I have had federal agencies reach out and ask about grant funding, and I've had to tell them that they already receive public support. It's called their budget. So they get our taxpayer dollars already. They do not get more. If you are anyone else in the public sector, though, you are eligible. That does not mean, however, that you are eligible for all grants. Grants can be viewed as different pots of money that are allocated for different purposes. Eligibility, as Shannon talked about, can be determined by type of agency, geographic location, intended outcome, a combination of factors. So regardless of the grant opportunities you qualify for, however, if you are seeking funding for a technology-rich project that includes a substantive Genetech component, the Genetech Grant Support Team is here to help. And as I said earlier, this assistance is available at no cost to you. So what is this assistance? Working with the Grants Office, our team provides funder prospecting, which is a fancy way of saying a grants development consultant will identify the best fit grants for you and your project using the Grants Office database of tens of thousands of available grants. From this research, you will receive a customized report you can use as a tool in your grant seeking and selection. Our team also provides grant readiness coaching, consultation on your specific project, and assistance with developing and strengthening your grant proposal. And if that sounds like a lot, don't worry, because we have developed a very simple step-by-step process. The first step is to complete and submit the information collection tool, which is available by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you may request a link to the form via email from this URL right here, the grants office at genetech.com. The tool itself is short and simple. It takes about 5 minutes to complete. We ask you for a little bit of contact information and about your technology needs and what problems you're trying to solve. So when you're filling out the form, keep in mind that grants tend to fund societal benefits, as Meghan and Shannon talked about, rather than specific technology. So jot down the outcomes you hope to achieve. Outcomes don't have to be complicated. Think about what Shannon said in her tips to justify technology. Outcomes can be as simple as reduced drug-related crime, or improved law enforcement response time to an incident, or an increase in the prosecution of crime. As Meghan said, outcomes should be measurable. And Shannon and Meghan both said technology is only a part of your project, right? So no one is looking for license plate readers or clearance or CityGraph for the sake of owning the technology. So no matter how cool the technology is, and Genetech technology is pretty cool, but you have to think about why you need that technology in the first place. That's your outcome. Once you fill out the ICT as thoroughly as possible, you use the submit button at the bottom of the form to send it to the Genetech grant support team, and we'll review it and send it to the grants office so they can get started on your report. Whether you're a tribal or a rural law enforcement or some other public safety agency, your ICT will be assigned to a grants development consultant who's an expert in your particular area. The consultant will take the information from the ICT and develop a customized report of best fit grant funding opportunities based not just on who you are and what you do, but your project outcomes, the technology you want to purchase to reach those outcomes, the size of your project, and your location. Once the report's ready, we'll send it to you and schedule a 30-minute call to review the identified grant funding opportunities with you. We'll discuss ways to hone your project to ensure it is a good fit with your identified opportunities. We'll make sure your outcomes align with funder priorities, and we'll talk about next steps. Customer participation is key in these calls and throughout the grant application process. If you have a lot of grants experience, just not enough time to look for the grants themselves, your support could begin and end with receiving the report. And that's fine. But if you need more support, you can go through the first call with us, and you may want to take it from there. But support can run the gamut. For instance, you can ask for grant coaching and help with grant selection, or assistance with responding to notices of funding opportunities, what Shannon referred to as NOFOs. Or perhaps you need assistance with proposal writing, or with review and editing of your grant applications. As long as you remain committed and actively engaged, we will supply as much or as little support as you need. As the applicant, you as the customer have to submit your own application, but our team is happy to supply any guidance or help you might need on the process, up to and including sitting with you on a Teams call as you submit your application, if that's what you need. And don't think you'd be the first, because I promise you, you wouldn't be. We will track all applications to award and be with you to answer any questions along the way. And hopefully we will be the first to celebrate with you when you're successful. And that's it. That's the entire process. Thanks so much for allowing me to speak with you today. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Now, Michael, I'll turn this back over to you.
Thanks very much, Jeannie. And we had one question that came in. I answered it on the interface. I just want to mention to everyone that the resources page that you'll receive a link to after today's session, also it's been entered in the chat, is going to be full of great information for you. And I think answer a lot of the unasked questions maybe that have been kind of percolating as you've been listening to today's session. Also, you can scan the code to engage with the Genetech Grant Support Program. I encourage you to do that. As Jeannie mentioned, it's full of really cool support, and it gives you an opportunity to not only learn about the Genetech solutions, but also the funding that can be available to support those technologies and achieve your organizational objectives. Okay, great. Well, again, big thanks to Genetech for sponsoring today's session. I want to thank our presenters, Jeannie Smith, Program Manager for Grants and Contracts from Genetech, Shannon Day, Senior Grants Development Consultant here at Grants Office, and Meghan Jacobsen, Grants Development Associate here at Grants Office, for sharing their knowledge and insights with us today. And to all of you, I hope you found this a valuable use of your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on a future webcast. Have a great day, everybody.